Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Following up on last night's Sunday address, the Somalians are also facing heat from outside the U.S. Somalians, like a lot of Africans from the Horn, such as Eritrea, Ethiopia, etc., they say, "I'm not black." And in many cases, a lot of them have even gone as far as to say, "I'm not even African." They think of themselves as being white adjacent. They are a nation unto themselves. Well, don't look now, but all those refugees from the Horn of Africa have one less place they can flee to. Uganda has said that they're not taking in any more refugees, specifically from Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia. They're not going to be granting them asylum. Now keep in mind, Uganda's been taking in refugees from a number of different places, and they're not saying they're not taking in refugees from anywhere else. They just said specifically those three places. So the criteria that was in place previously, which basically said, among other things, that you could apply for asylum even if your country was not at war. Well, as far as the Ugandan government's concerned, it doesn't matter. If you're coming from Eritrea, Ethiopia, or Somalia, don't even bother asking about asylum. They're not doing it. They're saying that they don't have the money for it, but we all know what that means. These guys are not using their own money. What's happened is you've had the UN and other organizations who have been giving them money, and a lot of that money's just been disappearing, hundreds of millions of dollars worth. But the main thing that they cite is that Donald Trump has cut refugee aid to that country. Donald Trump. Keep in mind, this announcement from the Ugandans came days before Trump's Somalians are garbage rant, so this development's been percolating prior to Trump's tirade. All it took, though, was the orange man cutting aid, and Uganda's throwing in the towel and saying, nah, we can't take in any more refugees, at least not from the Horn of Africa. They have to cut back severely. And yes, it is true that the people who come from the Horn are arrogant, but so are others like the Nigerians. And while that kind of behavior is off-putting, that's not the reason that this happened. That's not the reason that people are turning up their noses at them. Failed states can't afford to be arrogant. You can only behave like that when you got a stronger country who's funding you and giving you refuge. The main problem here, though, is not them being puffed up with false pride. What's been so damnable is that they insist on being totally disrespectful. They insist on it. And when you look at what other Africans say, you understand they've been doing this long before they got to the U.S. This is what was been going on in Africa among the Africans since time immemorial. And now what's happened is when the Western Europeans and the United States have cut your little old funding for refugees, well, they got to go ahead and do some triage and figure out who's going to be voted off the island. And they decided to vote out the Eritreans, the Ethiopians, and the Somalians first. But I don't see where that should be a problem. After all, these people have said that they're not black, so they can go ahead and go to the Europeans for help, right? And a number of those people from the Horn have even gone so far as to say that they're not Africans. These guys have really done the most to try to distance themselves as much as possible from any sort of blackness, any sort of Africanicity. It's just ridiculous, and this is the predictable result. The lesson here is when you have an attitude problem, sooner or later you're going to get an attitude adjustment. And yet you got a number of these people who are sitting here saying that, well, you FBAs, they're going to be deporting you next. They're going to be deporting you next. No, they're not. See, when people have been able to reside in a place for decades and they see that the laws are being openly ignored, at least in a way that they think benefits them, if this is allowed to go on long enough, these people are going to start to believe that that's what's normal, that what they're doing isn't really illegal, and that they've got the exact same rights and guarantees as a citizen. That's what they're going to start thinking. To them, they already are citizens. So that's why they're so confused by what's going on. I mean, when this pattern of behavior has gone on uninterrupted, and you've even had politicians who have been saying, why, these illegal aliens over here, these guys are the backbone of the country. America is a nation of illegal aliens. When people start hearing lies like that spoken long enough, they start to get confused, especially when you got groups like the Immigrant Black Caucus who are repeating that gibberish. But see, what the immigrants don't remember is that those people who are in the Immigrant Black Caucus, they already have their citizenship. So when those guys decide that they're going to be spouting fairy tales and fever dreams about how immigration doesn't matter if it's legal or not, it doesn't harm them to be wrong. They're not going to get deported. But a lot of the people who thought that they were their constituents or wished that they would be, they're the ones who are going to go. Perhaps in their home countries, this is the way the out-of-control corruption works, but that's the entire point of what the orange man is doing. He's telling them that they're not citizens, and America is not their home country. They've been waiting for some kind of exception to be made, some sort of mass amnesty to come along, but it hasn't materialized. So for the tethers and others who are trying to offer that pathetic talking point that, oh, you black Americans, you will be deported next. First of all, the 14th Amendment was written specifically for us, not for illegal aliens. Even the orange man had to admit that. Secondly, there's nothing the enemy can do to us that they haven't done all along, so the scare talk's not going to work. This observation about how the enemy can't do anything that they haven't been doing already, it was revolutionary and shocking when I first said it 10 years ago, when the orange man was first running. But now, people actually get it. They understand it. People are starting to lose their fear. And one more thing. If foundational black Americans were deported, I can promise you that would be the worst thing to happen to the tethers, because the same way that we don't tolerate disrespect here, we wouldn't be taking it in Africa either. The people there believe in fleeing. We believe in fighting. If a large number of us were to be there, we would get people in line, and they know it. And although they'll never admit it, that's one of the main problems that they have with us in particular. All of that dysfunction, all of that rabid tribalism, all of that sectarianism, all of that division that they've practiced for the longest time that has paralyzed Africa and made it where no progress gets made. Once we show up in appreciable numbers, we're not doing that mess. And they live with the fear that we would actually accomplish what they haven't been able to. And how would they explain that one? How would they live that one down? That's what goes through their minds. And speaking of people trying to live things down,
and right now, we are learning more about who those agents are focusing on in the New Orleans area, and they're focusing on the Vietnamese community. Scripps News national correspondent Katie Tubman joining us live from New York, and she has been following this story for us. So, Katie, what more can you tell us about this immigration effort in New Orleans?
Well, Stephanie, that effort has been dubbed by DHS Operation Catahoula Crunch, and it's where a 2-month operation has commenced as of this week with hundreds of agents on the ground and with a goal of 5,000 arrests across southeast Louisiana. Now, Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino, who has led these operations in other cities, touched down in New Orleans earlier this week, and numerous videos have been posted on X of arrests that have been happening across the area, and agents have been seen at construction sites, home improvement stores, and in one instance, stopping workers in the middle of a roofing job in Kenner, Louisiana, just west of New Orleans. Now, this operation comes after similar sweeps in North Carolina, Chicago, Los Angeles, and it comes as a part of the Trump administration's crackdown on illegal immigration. And largely, these cities have been Democratic-led cities that have been identified as by the federal government as sanctuary jurisdictions or sanctuary cities that have certain policies that restrict how much local law enforcement can cooperate with federal immigration authorities. And they have been targeted. But New Orleans is a little bit different in that it's the first of these high-profile operations to happen in a Republican-led state. Now, House Speaker Mike Johnson, who is from Louisiana, voiced his support of this operation, saying on X on Thursday, Democrats' sanctuary city policies have failed, making our American communities dangerous. The people of our great city deserve better, and help is now on the ground. Now, boots are definitely on the ground right now, and there's a lot of fear in the air. Local residents we spoke to told us that the communities there are on edge, particularly communities that have high populations of Latino residents as well as Vietnamese residents. Specifically speaking to the Vietnamese population, many of the locals there say there's a significant amount of immigrants who are there, many of whom endured waves of displacement after the fall of Saigon in 1975 at the end of the Vietnam War, and they made homes for themselves over the past half century in New Orleans, and that is being disrupted. We spoke with one local resident who's part of that community, T. Bui, who was born in the final days of the war and came to the U.S. as a refugee at the age of 3, and she lives in New Orleans, and she said that this feels like, this operation, a betrayal for a community that has been offered refuge for many years, for decades, and has had deep roots in this community. Here's what Boye had to tell us.
The folks who came here in the 70s were allies of the U.S. in a proxy war that the U.S. got involved in. Probably shouldn't have gotten involved in, but because the U.S. was there, now the refugees of that war have to come here. And they rebuilt their lives from scratch, and now this is their home. It's been over 50 years that the Vietnamese have been in the U.S. and in New Orleans. They've raised families, opened businesses, become part of the culture, the fabric of this country. And now they're getting ripped apart. Their families are getting torn apart. They are in a constant state of dread.
Donald Trump is sending ICE to arrest Vietnamese illegals in New Orleans. Now, Louisiana is a red state, and they've got that DeSantis wannabe clown Jeff Landry as their governor. And this is what's happening in a red state. Trump is sending ICE there. And in this case, they've captured a guy named Ben Van To, an illegal alien criminal from Vietnam who's been convicted of robbery, aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon, kidnapping, homicide, and aggravated assault. And they're putting him on the first thing back home.
I'm sorry for all that I've done. I made a mistake. Not only me, my family, you know. And all this time, let my wife live in fear, you know.
But you did just admit that you violated your immigration terms, right?
No, ma'am, I did not.
You did not when you were convicted for a crime?
Yeah, okay. Now, for a crime, yes, I did.
Okay.
I'd be grateful to go to Vietnam, even though I don't know nothing. I came over here when I was so young, you know.
So you'd be willing to go to Vietnam if they deported you to Vietnam? Okay.
My wife, if y'all can give me the paper, I'll fly over there myself. Yeah. I don't need y'all to come, buy me a ticket.
Now, for the misguided activist class who just don't understand how the real world works, they're trying to figure out why is it that there's been no real opposition to these ICE raids. I guess they figured to themselves that there were supposed to be hundreds of thousands of people taken to the streets the same way that they did during the BLM protests. But the BLM protests were organic. They came out of injustice against citizens here in America. Illegal aliens are never going to be able to get that kind of support. And in New Orleans, there's no protest at all, no demonstrations. So the perpetual failed activist class has been reduced to staging stunts at New Orleans City Council meetings. This is what you have to do when the masses aren't with you. You do some tomfoolery so you can go ahead and get yourself dragged out of the chamber for the cameras and try to claim that there's bedlam going on, but people aren't fooled. These empty displays don't move the needle and aren't going to change anything. And this is a good time to remind people that Biden's former flunky, Cedric Richmond, when he was a Louisiana congressman, he was on Twitter boldly demanding that immigration laws be completely and thoroughly ignored because there were certain members of his constituency that he wanted to make sure had immunity from law. He specifically singled out Vietnamese illegals as the main ones he wanted to have immunity from deportation, telling the federal government, you shouldn't be deporting anybody. Why? Because I say so. Louisiana is one of the main places where FBA culture is deep in the soil, but you wouldn't know it by how a sellout like Cedric Richmond talked. This man never said a word for or did a thing for Black Americans. But he was ready to go to war for people who weren't even citizens, who he knew were in the country illegally. Now, the part that the white media doesn't talk about is that after the Vietnam War, when it began bringing in huge waves of immigrants, they always make sure to put them into Black communities. What happens is the Black community is used in order to give seed money for the businesses for non-Black people, foreigners and such. And then what happens is these exact same people turn right around. They also get all kinds of immigrant loans and programs from banks and the federal government. And then this helps them to leapfrog over foundational Black Americans, or those exact same individuals start thumbing their noses at us. It's even worse when you consider that most of them have been practicing some form of anti-Black racism before they even got to the U.S. So what the U.S. government was doing was it was empowering individuals who would be hostile toward our community. And that's exactly what occurred. And that we were being used to bootstrap all of these other groups who then would make common cause with white supremacy and reinforce anti-Black racism. That's the part that doesn't get mentioned, but needs to be mentioned. And that's the reason why you got these groups who are feeling all betrayed and hurt now. As far as they were concerned, we had a deal. We had a deal with white supremacy. And now white supremacy is breaking the deal. Of course, white supremacy is breaking the deal. When white supremacy is done with its tools, it breaks its tools. And yet the tools never seem to figure that out. That's how you know there's been a program at work all of these years. Because not surprisingly, with this latest development, Cedric Richmond hasn't had much to say. All of a sudden, apparently he's not bothered by deportations or just doesn't care. The same way that the Immigrant Black Caucus has been quiet about Trump's Somalians are garbage rants. They know that they don't have the support of the Black grassroots, and they also know that their white leftist paymasters haven't told them to say anything, so they're keeping shut for now. But this is exactly what's been going on with the Black misleadership class. Apparently, a lot of those immigrants thought to themselves that these guys would come to the rescue, but they lost their legitimacy a long time ago, and without it, they've lost our support. And without us, they're not sticking their necks out for anything. I've seen, though, where you've had videos of Asian and African migrants sitting together talking about how Trump is persecuting them. But instead of it looking like an image of solidarity, instead it looks more like misery loves company. You can't have strength in numbers when you don't have the numbers. And the Asian community has never stood against white supremacy. There's been a lot of Asians who were murdered by white assailants, but the only time that Asians ever came together for a nationwide protest was on behalf of Peter Liang after he murdered Akai Gurley. That wasn't about justice. It was about maintaining some perceived white-adjacent status. It was political in all the wrong ways. So now you have Asians being rounded up by the exact same forces who were cheering them and patting them on the back during the Akai Gurley scandal. Those exact same individuals are now the ones saying, yeah, let's go ahead and round up the Asians. So what happened was they wound up empowering and emboldening the very people who are now coming after them. And those same Asian activists who were very bold on Peter Liang's behalf, you notice how none of them saying anything right now? They're not about to buck the system. That's because you can't be a model minority and defy the dominant society at the same time. Well, I for one would recommend that the Somalians go to CARE or some other Islamic organization, see if they can get support from them. And the Asians, they should go to their respective activist groups. But they should understand nobody's going to be taken to the streets for illegal aliens. And after decades and decades of disrespect and disdain, nobody's going to be going hard in the paint for the very people who they're looking at and saying these were the purveyors of anti-black racism too. People who wanted to be an island unto themselves are now finding themselves surrounded by nothing but sharks. The white right knew all of this. That's why they had the luxury of waiting until this moment. You had trash like Ann Coulter pointing all this stuff out. They've always known this mess. Now, the people who thought that they had buddies in white supremacy, they didn't know it or didn't want to see it. But reality always gets the last word. And the same way that the Somalians have seen their so-called prime minister running off with his tail between his legs and saying, I think it best that I just not say anything. The same thing is happening also with the Asians as well. There's not going to be anybody from Vietnam or Cambodia or Laos or Taiwan or anywhere else that's going to be raising a peep against what the orange man is doing. And it's for the exact same reason that Africa's own corrupt and crumbling misleaders aren't going to be rocking the boat either, because this is the misleadership class in those countries that wants America's largesse. They're all looking for a check. They're all holding out for it. Sure, they would prefer that their cast-off citizens not come back, but if they do, that's okay. They'll go back to the exact same slums they were in before. Nothing of any substance is going to change. And while these measures are far, far away from the kind of mass roundups that people were anticipating or at least hoping for, what it does do is unquestionably put the lie to a lot of that talk that's been coming from certain immigrant quarters. People who thought to themselves that they had somehow made it away from blackness, or that they had otherwise transcended people of color status and somehow made it onto the team of white supremacy. They can't deny what's happening. They can gnash their teeth, they can be angry about it, but that game of trying to pretend like you can have it both ways is running out. The people who have always wagged their finger in foundational black Americans' faces and said that we were the criminals, that we were the ones who were always breaking the law, now what's happening is they're being exposed across the board. And who is it that they're looking to and desperately hoping is going to bail them out? Us. None of this should come as a surprise to anyone, because you've had a lot of people who have always tried to say that, well, immigrants were the ones who built America. That's not true. Foundational black Americans built the country. Everybody else came to enjoy what was already built. And that being the case, if people feel like they were the ones who built America, then the best punishment that they could exact against the U.S. would be to remove their hard-working productivity, and then watch as America crumbles to dust and tries to beg them to come back. That would be the case if the rhetoric was true. But it's not true, and they don't have anyone to blame for it but themselves. After all, the corruption of white supremacy also mirrors the corruption of those who try to profit off of it. If there's one thing that you understand about a system as corrupt as this, it's that the one trait that none of these anti-black racists has is gratitude. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Mark Anderson, Nita Boswell, Frederica Moore, Avenge the Ancestors, and Mark Singleton. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.